Hey there, this is Charles with the Prodigal's Perspective. I did a live Facebook last night, and so I just kind of wanted to go over what I talked about last night, a shorter format. Uh, but I read from Genesis 41, verses 14 through 37, and then I used a couple other verses also. I was just kind of reaching over to grab my notes real quick. Um, Basically, Genesis 37 through 50 is the story of Joseph, Jacob's son, his oldest son from Rachel. Um, and so it's a part of what God is talking about as far as trust and putting your faith in God to such a great extent. Um, but also, it shows how God's will, his providential will, um, which the will of God can mean one of a couple of things. It can either mean his desire or the things that will that God or that God finds favorable to do, or it means that God is doing something that will be a useful purpose. And we see the useful purpose part in 1 Peter 3:17, when Peter's talking about if God should will it so that you suffer for doing what is right. And so this a part of that to say that whenever we read this part in chapter 41, is that this is God's will. This is a part of God's providential will, but it's not something that I believe He would find desire or pleasure in, but it's something that He's going to use for a purpose. And we see that a lot in our lives, that God is doing. And so I think we all know the story of Joseph. He was the favored son of his father, Jacob. His brothers didn't like him. They ended up beating him up and selling him to some Midianites that took him to Egypt and sold him as a slave. And then he went to work for Potiphar, who was kind of a captain over a lot of different things. And Potiphar promoted him in rank to the extent of that Joseph oversaw everything in his house. And then Joseph unfortunately got falsely accused by Potiphar's wife for doing something wrong, or basically trying to take advantage of her. And then Joseph was thrown into prison. But even then, he was promoted very quickly into the basically being under the captain of the entire prison. And so he kind of oversaw everything with the prison. Um, but then he comes to the point of the the chief cupbearer and the chief baker are both thrown into prison also. And these two men have a dream. Each of them have a dream. And we see in the earlier part of Joseph's story that Joseph has been given the ability by God to tell to an extent of what some dreams mean. And so he's given this ability by God to tell these two men what their dreams mean. And the cupbearer is going to be restored, and the baker is going to end up being hung and be executed. But then it comes about that and Joseph asked the cupbearer. He said, "Whenever you're restored, can you please remember me?" And the cupbearer, I'm going to believe that he says yes, but then he forgets because he's restored. He doesn't need to worry about all that. But then it comes a time that Pharaoh has a dream. And that's where I'm fixing to read about. Like I said, it's Genesis 41, chapter 41, verses 14 through 37. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. I have heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." And so Joseph first gives God the glory and doesn't say that he can do it, that it's God who's going to give the answer. He just simply uses Joseph. Verse 17, so Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, "In my dreams, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Lo, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such as I had never seen for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. And then the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. Yet when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had devoured them, for they were just as ugly as before. Then I awoke. I saw also my dream, and behold, 7 ears, full and good, came up on a single stalk. And lo, 7 ears, withered, thin, and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after him. And the thin ears swallowed the 7 good ears. Then I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me." And now here's where we get into the part of Joseph getting into trying to explain some things, but in the effect of, he also basically tells God's will. Verse 25, Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, "Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told Pharaoh what he is about to do, pertaining to God's providential will. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears scorched by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt. And after them 7 years of famine will come, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be known in the land the abundance will be unknown in the land because of the subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land. Let him exact 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become in the reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine." And so here we have Joseph saying, this is what's going to happen. God is already decided his providential will of useful purpose has already chosen, God has already made up his mind he's going to create this famine. But he has allowed Pharaoh to have this opportunity to know what's going to happen. And he's actually had Joseph tell Pharaoh exactly what he needs to do in regards of this famine. And what happens is, instead of Joseph saying, "Okay, I can do this," he says, "You need to find a person who can do this." He doesn't say he can. He's not saying that you should allow me to do it. He's just simply saying, this is what you need to do. This is what will be good. This is what will save Egypt. And actually, he goes on to say further, or God goes on to say further, that this is what you can do to look and be in a part of what God is doing. And Pharaoh said to his servants, verse 38, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is a divine spirit?" So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has informed you of all of this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are." And so Pharaoh puts Joseph, without request from Joseph, in charge of all of this. But now, in the midst of all of this, God's will is to bring famine. But God's plan for Joseph alone is to put him in a place that he can do something that he didn't think about doing. Now, he'd had these dreams long ago, several years, because by now he's about 30 years old when he's standing before Pharaoh. And he was 17 when he was first sold to the Midianites by his brothers. So that's, little less than 15 years that he's been dealing with all this. But it goes beyond this, because Joseph first says that the famine will be in the land of Egypt. But if we look at verse 56 in chapter 41, when the famine was spread over all the face of the earth. So this famine wasn't just for Egypt, because Joseph doesn't just have to help save Egypt. He has to help save his family. Because these dreams that he had about his family bowing down before him wasn't because God was going to make him great so much that he could be prideful. In fact, I don't doubt that some of what God did was to simply say, okay, Joseph, you're going to be put into a great position, but you have to learn to do this humbly. Do this with humility. Do this with the fact that you keep in your mind you don't necessarily deserve it, because we're talking about Egyptians versus Hebrews. Hebrews were not looked upon favorably by Egyptians. They simply were not. In fact, we see in part of the story when Joseph is supposed to be having a meal with his brothers, Joseph actually has to eat in a totally different room because Egyptians aren't supposed to be eating with Hebrews. That's actually what the scripture says. And so he has to go beyond this. He's been placed in a position that no Hebrew should hold. And by hand of God, by the plan of God, he's been put in here. And so, and we see that this famine spreads across the entire earth. So now there's a reason. Now begins the fulfilling of the plan of God. Why he put Joseph there. He told Abraham, he told Isaac, and he told Jacob, I will give the land of Canaan to your descendants. So that means, because even Jacob had left Canaan, and God had told him to go back. So at this point, Jacob is actually living in Hebron, which is in the land of Canaan at the time, that will in the future become the land of Israel. But it's not to belong to him yet. In fact, he's called a sojourner or a traveler, a foreigner to this land, because he's never claimed to own any of it. And so now he's put in a position that, God has already made a prophecy through one of the prophets. Actually, I believe it's through Abraham, that the people would actually go into a captivity for 400 years. And so here's another prophecy that still needs to be fulfilled. And the land is not to belong to Jacob, or even really his sons. It's to belong to Israel and the 12 tribes, which are represented by the 12 sons. But it's not to happen yet. In fact, there's still 400 years of this captivity, or this slavery that they had to go through. Not something I want to think about right now, but that's kind of where they're at. And so this famine falls upon the entire earth. And so now Jacob has to send his sons, 10 of them, to Egypt, and roughly they had to travel about 250 miles. It's going to take them about 12 and a half days if they're only able to travel about 20 miles a day. So it's going to take them 12 and a half days to get there, 12 and a half days to get back. So almost a month. And so this is not a short journey. This is going to be long. This is going to be hard. And so they had to make it worthwhile to do this. And so they go to Egypt, and Joseph recognizes them. They don't recognize him. He looks like an Egyptian. They are Hebrew. He's clean shaven. They have beards and different things. And so, but Joseph goes ahead and he kind of hides himself. He does what he needs to do. But the plan of God is working out in his life. The will of God is working across the earth, but the plan of God is working across Joseph's life. And then, what is even neater is, after all of this and this is done, and Joseph is really living out the plan of God for his life, He's been put in a position to where he can save his family. He can bring Jacob where he needs to be. He can put the people the Hebrew people where they're supposed to be to fulfill the prophecy that God had already given. Now he reveals the answer to Joseph. Now I'll go over to chapter 45, verses 5 through 8. Now do not be grieved, and this is Joseph talking to his brothers. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. Do not be angry yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve a remnant or a assurance, kind of a guarantee in the earth, and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and a lord of all the household and ruler over all the land of Egypt. And so the plan of God has been revealed to Joseph to the effect of, now I can explain all this. And even better is, not only can he see it, but he can tell his brothers, it's not because of what you did. In fact, all you did was you fulfilled the plan of God. You did exactly what God needed you to do. God's plan is not always fun. It's not always that great, but it fulfills the purpose that he needs for people, that he needs to use people for. In fact, if we go over here to chapter 50, in verse 20, this is after Jacob has died and all, and they're in the land of Egypt, everything. But Joseph again reassures his brothers, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result. And so even God reveals to Joseph not only his plan, but his will, his useful purpose part of the will of God. That even though it was hard and there was a lot of bad to it, God meant it for good because he was going to use it for good. God's will was to create a famine that would have hurt people, but it was for a useful purpose. It wasn't just because God was mad or didn't, wanted to punish people. He did it because there was a useful purpose behind it, because that's how God's plan for Joseph completely came to fulfillment, so that Joseph could see the full result, and so his family could see the full result, and so the prophecy could be fulfilled. And so really, today, I just wanted to come on here, and I know it's a little bit longer message than what I'm used to doing, but, the basic part of it is that God has done all this. God's will at times is his desire, but also at times is his useful purpose. And that providential will of God is what he's going to do, no matter what we say or do, or what, if we like it or not. It doesn't matter. It's a providential will of God. But his providential will is going to end up having a part of the plan that is for a person's life. And that person's may not be fun. There may be a lot of problems, a lot of issues that God allows for a reason, but there's going to be something great that comes off of it. Even for a prodigal spouse and a stander spouse, because that means that even though it's hard for you right now, there's a plan that God is working through. There's something that God has planned for your life that he says, you're not going to like this, but the things that I teach you through it, the way that you grow through this will be worth it. And the same for a prodigal spouse is what he does with that person after all of it is a great thing in so many ways. I can testify to that. And so I just wanted to share this message. And just, if you get the chance to read Genesis 41, 14 through 37, and then 56, and then 45, 5 through 8, you can see how God's will, his providential will, and the plan for Joseph's life all kind of work together. And even though you know, we say that we can't know God's will, well, we do know God's will. It's in the Bible. It's in the Word of God, God's will, His providential will, His moral will, and all of that works out into our personal will, God's personal will for our lives. But we don't always get to know the plan of God. And I say it like that because I use the analogy of if you were having a birthday, it's your birthday, and you sit there and you know there's going to be a party that evening, and you decide, oh, well, I'm going to call in sick today. I'm not going to go to work. I'm just going to get rested, and then 2 or 3 hours ahead of schedule, I'm going to get ready. I'm going to make sure I look the best. I'm going to wear the best stuff I have. And you do all that in preparation for this party that you know of. And you have a fun time, and it's great. It's really good and all. But you were expecting it. You were anticipating it. You didn't do anything else besides think about that. But what if that friend, you kind of have a typical day and just get some birthday wishes, but then that one friend that comes along and says, hey, let me take you out to dinner this evening for your birthday, and it's something you don't expect, and then they say, hey, let's go over to this place, and you get there and there's this huge surprise birthday party for you, and you weren't expecting it, and it's completely and totally caught you off guard because you didn't know the plan, and it turned out to be a great result. As he said, as kind of as well, as Joseph said in 50:20, in order, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result. So even though it wasn't a great day and it wouldn't have been that good and everything, what was hard or what wasn't good, God turned it into good so that He could give you a result that you weren't expecting. He could do something for you that you didn't expect and hadn't planned on. And so that's one reason I believe that God doesn't show us His plan, is because we're living it out. But He will end up showing it to us in the afterwards. That hindsight 2020 type of deal, and being able to see what His plan was, so that we can understand what all He's doing. So, I just want to encourage you all to. The main theme for me last night for this message was just trust. I say it like that because during all the time that we see with Joseph, with his brothers and being sold, he never asked God, why don't you stop this? He just trusted. When he was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife and thrown into prison, he didn't ask God, why don't you get me out of here? He just trusted. When he was put in the position of all of this, and he didn't cry out to God and say, I can't do this, or why don't you punish my brothers? He just trusted. And so there was always that, just trust God. But anyway, I thank you for whoever may watch this, and I just pray that your day is blessed, and that the rest of your week is blessed. So, thank you.